Hey, so this is Bonnie Meekins again, and I'm sharing some work with you that arose initially from my PhD. I'm a dance movement therapist in the UK. This is the third in the series about my WISE EMPoweR model, and in this video, perhaps this is the most important one of all of them, I'm going to be talking about safety, which I describe as a vector catalyst. Now, that's a bit of physics and a bit of chemistry in there. Just to explain that term, I use that term because if the individual feels safe in the therapy, then that sense of safety, the presence of it catalyzes positive change. It helps positive change to occur. And catalysts are things in chemistry that aren't changed themselves by a chemical process, but actually help it along. The reason I put the word vector in front of there is, as I say, vector is a term from physics that gives it directionality. Now, this is where my model accounts for deterioration in therapy, not just positive change. Because when the individual doesn't feel safe, and you ask them to describe what happened to them as a child, for example, it's re-traumatizing. And so the absence of safety isn't just a benign absence of something, it feels like an actual presence, a presence of danger, a presence of something very malign. That's akin, in this context where we're talking about child sexual abuse, akin to the presence of the abuser all over again. Now, I didn't ask them specifically about safety, but all 14 of the women, sorry, got the wrong number there, all 14 of the women who participated in my research actually spontaneously mentioned either the presence or the absence of safety, and described it in terms of their ability to move towards recovery, or in a few cases to deteriorate. Now, what I gleaned from all of this, from what they said, was that it has to be established early in the therapy, or really before the person walks in the room, and maintained throughout the therapy, through the therapeutic alliance. And I also I'll do a completely separate lecture on this another time, but I also have a system of developing what I call movement anchors, which is taken from Rothschild's work around anchors and safety in the therapeutic relationship. She doesn't quite use that. She uses the word anchors. She doesn't necessarily use the word safety, I'm not sure, but she talks about it in terms of balancing sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system activity. It's fabulous work, what she's done. I've just kind of taken it into the dance movement therapy arena. So that's one of the things that I did. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about how safety was facilitated in the groups that I and others ran in the National Health Service here in the UK for adults, women who were survivors of child sexual abuse, and who were users of the mental health services here. So one of them was contracting for confidentiality. Now, confidentiality sometimes means different things to different people. So I'll just talk a little bit about what I mean by that in this context. What we agreed in those groups was that you could go home and talk about your own experience in the group and what you had said and done to people that you trust. But what you didn't do was talk about anything anybody else said or did to anybody outside of the actual group sessions. And that included me as therapist. I included myself in having that right to confidentiality. So sometimes I might self-disclose in a group. But also I felt it was really, really important that if people had issues, for example, with me, that they stayed in the group room. And if they had issues with each other, that they stayed in the group room, that nobody gossiped outside of the sessions about what had happened in the session, even with other people from the group. So that seemed really, really important. Another way that safety was facilitated was in valuing difference. So it's very easy to make assumptions if, you know, we've all had a similar experience, whether that's abuse or being a mother or whatever. It's very easy to assume that it's the same, and it isn't. But that doesn't mean to say there isn't value in hearing each other's slightly different nuances. And of course, we are different in all sorts of ways: the color of our skin, our levels of ability or disability, our levels of intelligence, our jobs, our incomes, you know, it goes on and on. Our sexuality, of course. So there was a very deliberate valuing of our difference in those groups. A third way was that we worked towards containment before exploration. So people's strengths were built up before we worked towards any opening up. Timing was very important. We made sure that we gave enough time. So each session was 2 hours long, but the time was very contained. We started on time, we ended on time. We didn't kind of allow ourselves to get too indulged in time. We also used humor to lighten the mood every now and then, but not at any stage did we use humor as a way of attacking anybody else. It was never at somebody else's expense. There was a balancing of freedom and structure in all of the arts activities. So it wasn't, you know, I want you to draw a house that's got precisely these dimensions and this many rooms in it. It was an invitation to draw some representation of a house, for example, or to move. And there was always the option of sitting out. So that was the next thing, was that there was a right to say no to participation. Now that was crucial for people whose no had not been heard previously, or it felt like that. We also structured the space, the studio space, for action and reflection. So there was kind of roughly a third of the space had chairs on it, and people sat on those chairs when we were reflecting on, you know, at the beginning and end of the session. The circle provided a container, the circle of chairs, and the other bit of the space was where the arts activities would happen, where the action would happen. There was a non-judgmental attitude, which we encouraged in all participants, and everyone had some outside support. So they all had a key worker or care coordinator, who was usually either a social worker or that would be a mental health social worker, or a psychiatric nurse. And the group itself gave a sense of, I'm not alone with this, which Irving Yalom, in his 1975 book, calls universality, and it's one of the therapeutic factors in group work that he identifies. And also hearing and seeing other people's work enabled people to have a sense of hope, because there was always someone who'd kind of got a little bit further than you along the way with something, and you could see that they were changing, and it gave you hope that you might be able to change. So this is the last slide of this lecture. Couple of testimonies from my doctoral research around safety. One that showed how it can be useful as a vector catalyst towards positive change, and the other to show the risk of deterioration. So the first one, nobody was judged by anybody. There was the opportunity to be heard. Nothing was rushed. And this one said, I didn't feel safe. If you had a problem within the group, you either had to share it within the whole group or not share it. So I tended to take things home with me. Thank you for listening and watching. I'll see you again soon, I hope. Bye for now.